Welcome to Intelligent Human Leadership, leading yourself and your team. Do you ever find yourself grappling with a lack of confidence in your team? Or battling the relentless waves of concern and fear? Are the pressures to meet client expectations and the burden of missed opportunities weighing you down? On this podcast, you'll discover the strategies and insights that will reignite your team's morale and help you find the harmony and knowledge you seek to propel your business forward. Here, we explore innovative ways to reignite your creative spirit and achieve greatness, empowering you to lead with intelligence, compassion, and resilience. If you're ready to dive deep into your core of leadership challenges and be guided toward success, here's your host, founder of Steward Your Business, David Carr.
Welcome back to the Intelligent Human Leadership Podcast. So grateful to have you here. We had a really powerful conversation last episode about critique. And if you missed that episode, I really encourage you to go back to it. I'm going to build on it in this episode because critique is one, or criticism, I should say, criticism is one of what we call the four horsemen. For those of you that may have heard of John Gottman, he's just an excellent scientist, a man that has studied marriage for decades. And he talks about the four horsemen. You might have heard of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, right? The beginning of the end. And one of those is criticism. Now, criticism in and of itself isn't necessarily bad or good, but it can come off that way. It can come off negatively if you're not careful with your voice. And so what I thought would be an interesting one is I always lead from what I live. I'm going to pull back the curtains, if you will. You guys know I've shared some different things in the past regarding relationships, dynamics, and I'm going to be pulling and sharing up my 5-voice order with you on the podcast today. I've shared and talked about my primary voice, but I haven't talked too much about my nemesis voice, or the voice that is completely opposite of mine, which just happens to be my wife's voice. My wife is a guardian voice. And so I thought it would be great to take this opportunity on the podcast today to help you be that intelligent human leader, know where your voice is and how is it when it matches up with others that are different than yours. What I have found oftentimes is we are attracted to voices that are different than ours, and that's natural and a good thing. But what happens, what can attract can also cause challenges later on. And so I'm going to go dive a little deeper here in this podcast and talk about that relationship. For me, it's a marriage relationship, the most intimate relationship you can have with another person. But this goes into all different aspects of life, recognizing where your voice is and how is it with other people in your life. And it doesn't really matter what the voice is. These four horsemen, and you guys can look it up. Go look up John Gottman, Four Horsemen. I can give you guys a link to it. But there's four elements that are kind of the death nail to any relationship, really, not just marriage, but this is commonly associated with marriage. Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. If you're experiencing one or more of those in any relationship, marriage or otherwise, it doesn't point to a successful relationship in the long run. Now, the good thing is you're here on the podcast and you're learning and you're becoming that more intelligent human leader, leading yourself and all those around you, including your wife, your children, your coworkers, right? Your community, the organizations you're a part of. So what I'm here to do is help equip you, not just give you knowledge, but to help you actually apply it in your life. And so what I thought in this episode is I'll go through a real world example of the challenges that I personally have faced and continue to challenged and faced, where I've talked about know yourself to lead yourself. We all have tendencies. Some of these things don't ever change per se in the meaning of what our default way of being, but we can adjust our actions and behaviors to get a new desired result. Our mindsets can shift. And so I'm going to give you some resources in this podcast that will help you in the dynamics to come out on at least you personally, on a better note, on a better way of being, It may not save your relationship, I got to be honest with you, but at least you're going to be in a healthier place. It takes two to have a relationship. It's not one-sided. And so at least today on the podcast, you're going to be able to walk away and have some actionable items that you can apply in your communication with your spouse, your children, your coworkers. So for those of you that may have forgotten or aren't familiar with the 5 voices framework, I'll briefly go over that with you, and then we're going to dive in. I'm going to focus mostly on the connector voice. That's my voice, my first voice, I should say. And that is a future-oriented voice. And for those of you that are going to watch this on YouTube, if you're listening, I'm going to pull up my actual voice order assessment. So this is something that you can get when you work with me. You can take the free assessment for a single voice, but you can actually get all 5 voices and a lot more to it, where we do a deep dive on how and where you are and how this matches up with you. But what I want to jump to in this diagram you're going to see is, I'm just going to talk briefly about them so you can see them on the screen, those of you that are listening. There are 5 voices, and they all vary in their voice strength, in their voice focus, meaning are they future-oriented or present-oriented. And for those of you that will see, I'm a connector voice, which is a minority voice. Meaning about 11% of the population have that voice. It's not as rare as the creative or pioneer voices. Those are also future-oriented. But the guardians and the nurturers are present-oriented voices, and they're the ones that are most common. Over 70% of the population is going to be one of those 2 voices, which my wife is one. Guardian is her primary voice. A connector is a champion of relational effectiveness. Not necessarily relational in harmony or emotions, although I'm emotionally oriented. It's more about being collaborative, effective communication, getting things done, if you will. While the guardian is more about due diligence, resources, efficient systems and processes. So there's an overlap in the sense of efficiency, but efficiency about what? And we're going to dive into that in the episode here. So what you'll see in this image that is on the screen, if you're watching me on YouTube, is a brief little overview of the voices, the voice order strength. The connector and the guardian have a very similar voice order strength, meaning the loudness and the intensity. Mine's actually a little bit louder typically than my wife. It doesn't always mean in voice like it could mean in voice, but it also just means in presence as well. So nurture is the quietest voice, pioneer is the loudest voice, generally in volume and just overall presence. And so what we're going to do is we're going to peel back this here in this episode and dive into some better understandings of, number 1, the 4 horsemen. Again, that's criticism, contempt, defensiveness. It's stonewalling. So we're going to dive into these things and how do they interweave with the 5 voices. And so I thought that would be a great tool to go into, because honestly, just coming off of the critique episode that we just talked about, and reflecting and looking at the real life challenges I face as a connector, living with a guardian voice, and I've seen this played out in other clients I've worked with. And so if you're a connector, lean in. If you're a guardian, lean in, and anywhere in between, because this is applicable in how do we deal with conflict? How do we deal with these areas of criticism, contempt, defensiveness, or stonewalling when it starts to show up in a relationship? How do we deal with it in an effective, healthy way to get us what we really want? So criticism or critique, I talked about that in the last episode, is, a way of typically a guardian's point of view. They're very big about systems and processes and make sure things ever follow through. What happens is a guardian may criticize a connector like myself because I'm future oriented, and a guardian is much more present oriented. And so they look at that's not very practical, and they're looking at all the things in a good way of looking at risks and evaluating them. What that can happen to a connector like myself or anyone else is that sometimes that leads to feeling of maybe inadequacy, failure, disconnection, because you feel like you're letting the guardian down by that criticism. Now, the guardian isn't doing that to make you feel bad. It's not that way. I have something I had to learn to receive the criticism in the spirit in which it's given. Now, sometimes it is negative and pointed, but it can also start off as just being very straightforward, and there's not a ill intent applied at all. And so you have to understand these things and start to peel them back as to these four horsemen. How are they showing up? Are they showing up negatively? Is that your perception, or is it actually the person? And hopefully, if this person on the other side is mature enough, they can recognize in themselves, yeah, that's really coming off more negative. The internal challenge that connectors face is that criticism can come off as a personal attack, or affects the relational value or our creativity, like what I'm bringing to this. Again, this is something I've had to learn. If you're a guardian, though, if you realize this, again, if you're effectively trying to communicate to a connector, realize that you could be doing more damage than, helping them. And so I, again, had to learn as a connector, being that intelligent human leader, where is that criticism coming from? Is it coming from a healthy place because they really tend to help me build me up? Or is it coming from a place of breaking the relationship down because they're wounded, they're hurt? There's a deeper belief system here that drives these actions, right? The connector, like myself, wants and seeks that affirmation. One book I really love is called The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. If you're not familiar with the book, really good book. We all have different love languages. Now, and I think we have all of them. It's just what's our preference. One of them for me is words of affirmation. I really appreciate the words. I would appreciate that, to be honest with you, more than acts of service. That's another love language. But the words mean more than a service to me, or a gift even. That's different. And if you don't understand this dynamic, the guardian is all about practicality and order and making sure everything is done. My wife has got a great system for getting the dishwasher put together, putting things away, and I don't always think that way. I'm a future oriented. I deal with some ADD at times as well. And so it's learning to live with each other in understanding, appreciation, and realizing it's not personal. It's just the way the person naturally shows up. And so criticism is one that we dived into last time quite a bit. And quite honestly, I don't know if we'll get to all of them here today, but we're going to try to see how far we can get in this episode, and there's more that we can get to. But the other element is, we've talked about one of them, criticism. Another element is contempt. How the feeling of contempt. I think you guys all know what that feels like. That contempt, or some of the rolling of the eyes, or the huff, right? A guardian may dismiss a connector's ideas, and it may be, again, because of that practical nature, and it's not necessarily starting off negative, but it can come off negative, and they can devalue the connector. And the connector also has to realize this, recognizing, okay, where is this? Now, as a connector too, I can be passive aggressive, I can be bring sarcasm into the mix, or have dismissive comments that also erode or degrade or show contempt in a different way. Now, there's ways we can show contempt. You have to be aware of this. What are your tendencies? How are you showing up here? Look at that emotional impact of the contempt on the connector. So how is the connector, and then how is that being, absorbed? I look at that, and for me, as a connector, I can tell you how I feel. One thing you'll know as we go through the 5 voices and we look at this, other people can't understand truly what you feel. It's only what you determine your feelings. And the better you get at identifying the feelings, the better then you can actually make changes or adjustments for them. So again, there's beliefs about recognition, how I show up, and how they're different than guardians and connectors. Guardians, although they might, most people appreciate some words of affirmation, they're more about if you follow the system or the process, if you go through these steps, that's more meaningful to me than you just saying you're going to do it, or even you try to do it and you mess it up. I want to see you do the actions. I want to see you follow the steps. And when you don't do the steps, they feel slighted, or they feel like, man, is this personal? And so again, the dynamic here is we can, again, hurt each other and recognizing, how am I showing up? Am I starting to show contempt because they're showing contempt to me? It devolves down. And then we can get into the area of defensiveness, the third area under the four horsemen, where have you ever felt, on defense, the guardian is looking for stability, the connector is looking for relational harmony, and so you have competing things. I want these things all taken care of. I want to have this connection here. And so one doesn't happen with the other. That defensiveness erodes trust, it erodes the communication, and it leads to further disconnection within both parties. And then what happens there, right, is internally our trust and vulnerability goes down, and so we stop our either relationships are either building up, or they're breaking down, right? So if we start to see defensiveness in ourselves or our loved ones, that should be a warning sign to you to say, okay, wait a minute, something in there is not healthy, something is not right. And then the last part, the worst one of all, I think, is at least if you have criticism or contempt or defensiveness, you have some kind of communication. Now, albeit it's not healthy, but you have at least some communication. You're talking. When you stonewall and literally you completely shut down, it's really difficult. Guardians, when they feel violated, like you keep not following these steps, they will withdraw from conversation. Like, I'm done. I'm out. And this is kind of inwardly thoughtful, I would say, people too. Some people would say maybe introvert. And then what happens is, as a connector, I'm trying to continue to reach, right? Because I want to connect. I want to make that relationship work. It has the negative or opposite effect of what I really desire. I've again had to learn this, because if I keep pushing the guardian for that connection, they're like, I'm already shutting down. You're pushing me further away. Instead of letting them come out of their shell, and then I'm going to get into some solutions here in the podcast. I know I'm talking a lot about the challenges, the problems here at the beginning, but I think it's important to lay the groundwork for how we can be successful here. The connector's frustration comes, like I said, the rejection, quote unquote rejection, when your partner, your coworker shuts down, and you want to solve it. You want to get it figured out. Let's resolve this, right? So you have loss of emotional safety. And then both partners or folks feel unheard, they feel misunderstood, and everybody kind of goes to their corners. And then everybody starts to walk on eggshells. And if you're in an office situation, people maybe start picking sides or whatnot. And so we're going to talk briefly here on some strategies, and I'm going to be coming back in future episodes. We're going to do a deeper dive in how we can apply these. So come back in our next episode. Just to get you come back, I want to start with some strategies here, because I briefly gone into the four horsemen of criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. These are all deadly, but they're not irreversible. We've all been hurt at some point, physically, emotionally. Can be healing. It may not always be the way you desired it to be, but there's ways that we can overcome. And so I'm going to give you a couple here in this podcast, and then we're going to come back and dig in further. But let's talk about criticism. Let's challenge ourselves to look and how do we overcome this? How do we start to overcome? Well, why don't we look and move from criticism to appreciation? This is a big one. One thing I do in my core 4, you guys may have heard me and talk about previous episodes, is I gamify my day and I look to show ways of appreciation and gratitude. That really helps start to shift the story. And it starts to provide a way of constructive feedback. So one of the things I've recognized, the guardian voice is so great at processes and systems and evaluating risk that I needed to receive it in the spirit that it was given. I recognize oftentimes it was not given out of a negative place. It wasn't given out of a way of being hurtful initially, but it was coming from a place of, I want to help you be better. And so as a connector, one thing I can do is ask questions that clarify rather than assume, right? That's going to help you address miscommunication. And these could be very minor little things, but you may take it the wrong way. So again, appreciate and clarify what your partner is saying, what your coworker is saying. Draw that out from them and say, you know what? I appreciate that. I had a conversation with a gentleman today, and he was giving me some very candid feedback. If I didn't have the maturity to understand, and this is why I go through the 5 voices with clients, is that you can understand, make better decisions, collaborate more effectively when you can shift your story and your narrative. And so looking at ways to appreciate that, to draw them out and say, okay, you know what? I see the good that you're trying to help. I see the good, even if it may even be coming at it from a negative place, but you're like, you know what? That actually can help me be a better person. It can help me show up for my family, my coworkers, in a healthier way. How about move from the contempt to respecting? Now, that's hard. Don't get me wrong, but how can we replace that contempt that comes up with respect? Recognizing each other's strengths and contributions. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about the 5 voices tool and the framework, is it gives us a way of understanding, appreciating the one another and the differences that they bring. And you're like, oh, you know what? That isn't me, but I see the value in what that person brings. And so one way we can do that is provide regular check-ins where we can appreciate each other. Write a note of appreciation. Send a text. Leave a voice message. Be intentional about how you're recognizing how that person is showing up. Lead by example. Be that most intelligent human leader in the way that you're showing respect, the way you're leading, and not making assumptions, but looking in a way that you understand and appreciate the person for who they are and where they're at in their journey. Doesn't mean they can't improve. Doesn't mean that they can't do better. It's just recognizing where they're at and encourage them. Because if there's a behavior or a way of being that you're like, man, I do appreciate that part, affirm it. Because most often we're going to fall into ways of being that are affirmed and appreciated, versus those that are, pushed against and criticized and shown contempt. Last 2, we have got 2 more here, and come back to our next episode because we're going to dive deeper into how to apply this even further. Defensiveness, right? How do we move from defense to openness? From that closed, protected. I've worked with desert tortoises for years, and tortoises, turtles, they close, right? They pull up. Everything's pulled in. Can't get me. You're not going to get me. When they're open and they're curious, they explore the world. They see what's around them. But otherwise, we don't want you in defensive mode. Your cortisol levels go up, right? The stress hormones. And so, there's ways that we can reduce that defensiveness, including active listening, not listening to respond, but listening for understanding. I've talked about that in past episodes. You can use an I statement. This is what I believe. This is what I see, right? Create that environment for a safe conversation. It starts with you. You can lead. You can create this space. Acknowledge each other. Feelings are not right or wrong. Allow them to express their feelings. Allow them to share their perspective. That's them. That's who they are. Where they're coming from. That's where they see it. And be open-minded to maybe they're seeing some things you don't see. Again, drop the defensiveness will help you open up and see things differently. And that's hard because our emotions kind of swell up, right? in us. They start to take over like waves. And so what I'm trying to say is help your process your emotions, both of you, and recognize how those can help you and leverage you in building your relationship, but it can also tear it down if you're not careful. And again, last one here are the 4 horsemen is stonewalling, right? Maybe you need to take a break. Maybe it's the time of day. Maybe you shouldn't be talking first thing in the morning. I'm a talker. I like to do that the first thing. Sometimes I say, or maybe not late at night. Those may not be energetically the best times. I set maybe time limits. Just be very clear. Like, you know what? You want to have a statement. I want 5 minutes or 2 minutes, or what that looks like for you. It may even mean scheduling a regular connection time, like just to keep the relationship strong. Because you're like saying, you know what, you're worth it. It's intentional. Let's just spend 5 or 10 minutes here. That works for you. So we could do a check-in. Where are we at right now? And you're not going to solve the whole world's problems right there. But even if you can start to have some conversation to build on that patience and empathy for re-engaging will pay dividends. Again, you cannot force a person into the relationship. You can't force them. You can't twist their arm, right? But these are some ways how you can be that intelligent leader, knowing your own voice and the voice of others around you. That's what this whole podcast is about. That's why I'm here. That's why I coach others in their teams together. I recently have just been certified with 5 voices for teams, and I would love to help you and your organization apply this learning and understanding to be healthier. The more we do this intentionally, the longer and the better our organizations will run. For any of you that have owned a car, if you don't do the regular maintenance and you just run that thing into the ground, it's not going to last you long. But if you take care of it, you do the maintenance, if you look at that, you're going to get paid dividends. It's actually going to take you on long trips. It's going to get you where you need to go, in comfort, in style. And that's what I want for you, being that intelligent human leader. We're going to come back on our next episode, and we're going to dive deeper into applying the 5 voices in daily communication. And we'll go back here to these 4 horsemen of criticism, contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling, and we're going to apply that to the 5 voices framework and show you a way that you can show up better, being that most intelligent human leader. I appreciate you guys joining me on the podcast. If this resonated with you, of course, please like, subscribe, share with others, follow along with me on social media. I'd love to connect and hear from you, and appreciate you guys being along with me on this journey. Until then, take care, everybody. Thanks for listening.